Hey sewing friends, welcome to my channel Ro Can Sew. I'm Ro, and this episode is 20 questions for sewists. So I'm subscribed to Annette's channel, Sewing in Michigan, and she recently posted a video with 20 questions for sewists. In her video, she explains the questions and she answers them, and she opened it up for other sewists to create videos answering the 20 questions and then tagging her. So that's what I'm going to do today. So thanks, Annette, for this opportunity. I'm going to link Annette's YouTube channel in the description box below. So when you get done watching this video, I would appreciate it if you went over and checked out Annette's video so that you can see how all these questions came about and see what her answers are. Okay, so here we go. So question number one is, how do you feel about using a new pattern? I'm not against a new pattern. I appreciate both a new pattern and I appreciate a tried and true pattern. I think they both have their benefits. I think it more depends on the mood that I'm in. I do appreciate the opportunity to potentially learn new techniques or new order of operation or just new ways of sewing that a new pattern might provide. That said, I do also appreciate a tried and true pattern. You don't have to look at the instructions. You already know how to make it, and you can just kind of whip it up, and then you can play around with embellishing it or making adjustments to the pattern just for fun because you already know how it fits and how it works. So I don't really have a preference. As for right now, I'm kind of typically staying within the patterns that I have on hand just because I have a decent sized collection to work from. But I don't have a preference either way. I don't have any strong opinions on that. So question number two is, do you remake or mend? And this question has to do with how you deal with things that you've made, but they no longer are suitable for you for whatever reason. Generally speaking, I tend to wear, when I have a make that I do like and I do wear, I tend to just wear it until it's unwearable, basically. If I have something that I have made and I know after making it, it doesn't work for me, I will typically try to rehome it. So I will try to find somebody else that the garment does work for, especially if it's something that I've spent a lot of time on and I've put a lot of embellishment and stuff on there. Cutting it up for parts would kind of hurt my heart, I think. So generally speaking, I will either wear my item out or I will try to rehome it. If I do end up with something that I'm not wearing, for example, I did make 2 Hope woven dresses at one point in 2 different lengths, and I ended up finding out after I made both of those that that pattern just it wasn't me. So I did end up repurposing those particular garments. For the most part, because of the gathering in the skirt and the amount of fabric there, I was able to get shirts out of each of those. So that's kind of how I do that. I typically try to just keep it. If not, I'll try to rehome it. And then as a last resort, I might chop it up, but it's case dependent. Question number 3 is, do you make toiles or mock-ups? I really don't, so I tend not to do that. I will use a product called Pattern Ease, and I'm a pattern tracer, so I will trace my patterns and I'll trace them on the Pattern Ease, and the reason is because you can sew through that. It's sturdier than the tissue paper or tracing paper, so it doesn't tear as easily. You can sew through it. In fact, you're supposed to be able to wash it, but I've never run mine through the washer. But I do use that. I'll trace my patterns and I will sew a portion of it, like maybe the top to see how the shoulders fit. I might put darts in it to see if the darts are positioned properly. So I lean more into the tissue fitting using the Pattern Ease material, and I just try not to do the mock-up or a toile. I know they have their benefits. If I were doing a type of garment that was extremely involved, an overly fitted gown of some nature, in that instance, I probably would consider doing a mock-up, but for the most part, the types of things that I sew, I don't necessarily feel like I need to do a mock-up anyway. So, no, I generally don't. So, question number 4 is an easy one for me. How do you feel about pre-washing fabric? So, I do pre-wash my fabric at least before I sew it. If I don't pre-wash it as soon as it comes into the home, then I will pre-wash it before I work with it. I tend to work with natural fibers, which do have a higher chance of shrinkage, which I would like to avoid. I do sometimes lean into doing embellishments on my projects. So if I'm going to put that amount of time and effort into it, I kind of want to make sure that it's not going to shrink after I finish making it. And outside of that, the fabric has just been out and sitting in shops and sitting on shelves and going through warehouses. And so I just think that it's best to wash it before I work with it, definitely before I wear it. And I have noticed that a lot of the times it changes the texture of the fabric. So it might come in a lot more stiff, and then after I wash it, it changes how the fabric hangs, how supple it is. Um, I suppose in some cases it might be easier to not wash it because if it's because of the stiffness it might arrive in, but I typically wash my fabric. Question number 5 is, do you finish your seams and how? So I do tend to finish my seams. In fact, I almost always finish my seams. I can't think of when I don't finish the seams. It would be very rare if I didn't finish the seams. So I tend to do a type of felled seam. So I will sew my garments right sides together like you normally would, and the seam allowances are then exposed on the inside of the garment, and I'll just cut one seam allowance down a portion, and I will wrap the other seam allowance around it and then press them both to one side and top stitch them. According to my Vogue sewing book, that is a felled seam. So that is what I primarily do. That's my preferred type of seam finish. That said, that's not always the most practical, depending on the garment or the fabric. So I will French seam when necessary. I do have a serger that I can use. In fact, I will serge seams, especially if I'm working on like a new pants pattern, because I don't know if I'm going to need to let the seam in or let out the seam. And if you're felting a seam or doing a French seam and you've kind of cut the seam allowance, you have sort of reduced the amount of flexibility you have with which to make adjustments at that point. So if I am making a new pants pattern, or if I'm making a certain type of pant pattern, maybe a dressier type or something, I might serge the seams so they can be pressed open and be a more smooth surface. But generally speaking, my preferred finishing is a type of felled finishing. So question number 6 is, what is your favorite sewing activity? And I think for me, mine would probably be embellishments, adding the decorative stitching, the decorative elements, top stitching, fraying the edges, hand sewing elements on. I think I probably enjoy that the most. In addition to that, probably pressing my seams. I don't like pressing the garment after it's sewn for some reason, but as I'm sewing, each time I sew the seam and then I take it to the ironing board and I really press to set in the stitches, that's a really satisfying element of sewing. So I think those are my favorites. Then the counter question to that, question number 7, is your least favorite. My least favorite thing about sewing, or my least favorite activity for sewing, probably is both cutting out the fabric, and that's probably mainly because I can't break myself from obsessing over the grain line, and I struggle a lot with trying to conserve my fabric as much as possible. So that tends to be kind of a stressful, long process for me. Outside of that, I think probably interfacing. Cutting out my interfacing just is not my favorite part, and I don't know why. I will typically wait until I need to use the interfacing before I cut it out. I just can't get myself to cut it out at the start of the project. I don't know why, but I can't do it. I will, however, on certain garments that I make with frequency, like I do make a lot of shirts for my husband, so I do have the interfacing for like the collars, the various parts you would interface. I do have a stack of those cut out in bulk. So I have like some cut out in a light colored interfacing, some cut out in a dark colored interfacing. So whenever I go to make a shirt for him, I already have some pre-cut interfacing pieces that I can work with. Just because I dislike cutting it out that much. But I still won't iron it on or use it until absolutely necessary. So question number 8 is stash fabric or new fabric. So I don't typically buy fabric for each individual project. I tend to purchase fabric and patterns too, for that matter, kind of in waves. So I will be in a buying period, or like right now, I'm not in a position to be able to acquire any fabric, so I just won't look at any sales or go to any shops. But when I am in an acquiring fabric phase, I typically will order online, and I will typically buy according to the sale price, the fabric type, and whatever the print. If it's a solid, I tend to gear more towards solids. But I will kind of factor all of those elements together, and it has to be something that I really, really, really like, or I have a very high assurance that I will probably be able to use easily. And then I just add that to my collection so that I can build up my collection over time. So when I enter into a period where I am unable to purchase, I will at least have a backup that I can work from. That's kind of just how I've been doing it, and so far that's been working for me. Question number 9, are pockets a must? For me, pockets are a must. I do like pockets. I'm awkward socially, so having my arms hang out about my side and there's no place for my hands to go feels kind of weird. So I do like pockets. Yeah, I tried to make sure that I have pockets in my garments. Question number 10 is knits or wovens? I'm more of a wovens person. I just like the way wovens function. I like that I feel like I can embellish them more. They handle better with fraying and different types of stitching due to the structure of the nature of a woven fabric. So yeah, knits, I don't enjoy sewing with them. I'm just not a fan. Yep. More of a wovens person. Question number 11 is favorite fasteners or no fasteners? And I would say, well, first of all, no fasteners would be ideal. It saves cost, it saves time, and there's less to fiddle with when you're putting the garment on, I guess. So I definitely appreciate no fasteners. That said, as far as fasteners go, I don't think I have a favorite. I can probably, and part of that's because I don't have a whole lot of experience with a lot of different types of fasteners, but I can say that so far, from the things that I have done, my least favorite as of now would probably be the invisible zip, which probably doesn't surprise some of you. Um, I'm just not a fan of it. I don't really enjoy putting them in. I don't really enjoy how it functions in the end. I'm just not a fan. I've been leaning more towards what my Vogue sewing book refers to as a centered zip. So even if I'm putting it on the side seam, I'm putting it in a centered fashion, and I'm just using a standard zip. And I just like the process of putting that in better, and I think that it functions more easily anyway for the things that I've sewn thus far. That said, I do think that there are some garments that an invisible zip would probably look much nicer on. So it doesn't mean that I'll never put in an invisible zip again. It's not my preferred. Okay, question number 12 is sewing for self or others? I primarily sew for myself, although I have sewn for others. Outside of myself, the other person that I sew for the most would be my husband, but I have sewn for other family members, and I have sewn for charity. I have not sewn for profit, and yeah, those are probably the only, mostly for myself, mostly sewing for myself, but I do sew for others on a case dependent type of situation. I actually do enjoy sewing for my husband. I actually find sewing shirts for him a form of palette cleanser sewing for him. Question number 13 is where do you get your sewing inspiration from? So it's YouTube or Instagram or another platform. I think I go to the different platforms for different things depending on what it is I'm looking for. If I'm looking for a specific tutorial, if I'm in a mood where I want to just hear some chatty talk about what someone's going through, what their sewing experience is, what they've been getting up to in their sewing room, or if I just want to kind of scroll through and see some images. It also depends on where I'm at when I'm doing this. So I'm not stuck on anyone. I use them as desired. Question number 14 is dresses or separates. And this question is about which do you prefer to sew? So let me start off with saying that I sew more for the act of sewing than I do for the final product. And I say that because I typically wear separates more than I would wear a dress, but that said, I sometimes prefer sewing dresses than separates because sometimes the fitting of pants is more challenging or not what I want to deal with. Sometimes dress sewing is just more fun. So, what I might prefer to sew on any one time might not necessarily correlate with what I prefer to wear. But because I sew more for the act of sewing, I'm going to sew what I feel led to sew for that reason. So question number 15 is, how do you get rid of or pass on me makes? So if something doesn't work out for me, what do I do with the garment? So I will typically try to find a new home for that. And I will typically start with family first, see if there's someone I know who I know would want the item, can use the item, can wear the item, or make use of the item. I'll probably start there first. I don't think that I would give it to Goodwill or anything like that because I have heard that some of those places do not accept homemade garments. So, yeah, I would probably, and I have, I say I would probably, I have made garments and I've given them to family members because they didn't work out for me. Outside of that, I would probably then rework the fabric if need be. But that would be a last resort because, as I mentioned earlier, I put so much time into my makes. Deconstructing it would kind of hurt my heart a little bit. Question number 16 is quick sew or involved sew? Again, this is kind of situationally dependent. I don't have a general preference of one versus the other. I think they both have their place and time. But that said, I guess I could probably safely say that I tend to sew more, I don't want to say involved or complicated, but I have a tendency to be able to complicate or make the project involved, even though it may not have been intended. So I haven't sewn anything like big ball gowns or big costumes or anything with like lots of pieces. There are a few Vogue patterns that I've sewn that have had like a lot of darts in places and have had more pieces and some different shaped pattern pieces for it. Outside of that, I think that for me, the things that I would call an involved sew are probably ones that I made involved. So maybe I decided I wanted to have extra top stitching or extra seam lines, or I wanted to embellish it. Then I'll probably lean into that if I feel drawn to. That said, I totally appreciate a very quick, satisfactory, reliable, dependable make. That's my answer. Question number 17 is social or solitary, and this is referring to the act of sewing. So the act of sewing, I'm very much a solitary sewist. I very much do go into the room, close the door, sew alone, sew quietly. Wouldn't do well in a setting, not with trying to accomplish anything successful in the sewing anyway, in a large group. That said, I have been interested and intrigued by those of you who partake of the sewing socials, whether they're in person or virtual. I don't have any kind of an in-person sewing social around where I live, not that I'm aware of anyway. And I have not participated with a virtual one, though that's not because I don't want to. I would like to do that at some point, but I don't know that I would be able to participate in a virtual sewing situation while also sewing and accomplishing something productive. I don't think I could do those things at the same time. Not well, anyway. Question number 18 is, do you have a dedicated space? We are currently in the attic. It is currently very hot. You can probably see that I'm melting on screen as I'm doing these questions. Fortunately, we're on 18. I do have the third floor that I can sew on. It's technically the attic, but it does have finished walls, a finished floor. It does have a door that I can close. So I can contain my sewing project in this space, and it doesn't interfere with the rest of the household. That said, I do share my sewing space with some of my son's belongings, so that does impact my sewing experience depending on the day. But yeah, I do have a space where I can sew and I can close that off. Question number 19 is labels or no? I would have to say no. And that is because I'm one of those people that I have actually cut out labels from ready-to-wear garments that I found irritating to my skin. So for me, that's actually one of the perks of sewing, is that I could make a garment and there aren't any labels or tags on the inside that's going to cause me any sort of sensitivity issues. I've seen some really pretty ones. I've seen some really funny ones. I've seen some very appropriate ones, but it's just never been something that I've been into. And then the final question, question number 20, is percentage of me-made versus ready-to-wear, and do you have an ultimate goal that you're headed towards? I don't have any kind of ultimate goal. Again, I sew more for the act of sewing than necessarily for the product of sewing. So for me, I never felt like I had to achieve so many makes or that I had to get rid of my entire wardrobe. In fact, as you already know, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not really a fan of sewing with knits. So there are certain things I probably would have no desire to sew anyway, you know. Undergarments, swimwear, activewear. I don't think those are things that I would want to sew anyway. So I'm okay with having a split of me-made and ready-to-wear and making that work for me. So that's it for the 20 questions. I want to thank Annette from Sewing in Michigan for compiling this list of 20 questions and opening it up for other sewists to participate in the fun. Let me know down in the comments if you relate to any of my answers that I gave for any of the questions, or if you strongly feel differently about any of them, or better yet, make your own video and answer the 20 questions that Annette put together, and just make sure to tag her in your description when you do so. And that's it for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you stuck around, please give me a like if you like this video so that I know that you liked it. Please consider subscribing to see if I can get to 1,000 subscribers. And until next time, that's it for today. So I'm going to go somewhere and cool off now. Bye.